Hey y'all, my name is Celia, and I'm a junior studying public policy and sociology and minoring in education. And a fun fact about me is that I hope to be a public school teacher someday. In college, this is often how we have to introduce ourselves. We say our name, our year, our major, and sometimes a fun fact about us. And whenever we meet someone new, we tend to get the same information back from them. But this information is really just a small glimpse into who we are. So today, we're going to get to know each other and ourselves a little bit better by going to the roots of our identities. As I said before, my name is Celia, but to be exact, my name is Celia Elise Tan Hui Furlow. And yeah, it's quite a mouthful. I used to be embarrassed to share my full name with people when I was younger. I hoped that it wouldn't show up on rosters, and I really dreaded having to write it out on official papers. But as I've gotten older, I have grown to appreciate the meaning, history, and identity behind names. For example, my middle names, Tan and Hui. Tan means bright blue and brilliant, and Hui means lily flower. And these names, like me, are Vietnamese. I'm adopted, and when adopting me, my parents wanted to let me keep some of my identity in my name. I was born in a hospital in Ho Chi Minh City, the capital of South Vietnam, and a few days following my birth, my biological mother abandoned me at the hospital, and I was transferred to an orphanage shortly after. But luckily, 5 months later, my adoptive parents came and they took me home to Kingston Springs, Tennessee. My adoptive mother has polycystic ovarian syndrome and an autoimmune disease called multiple sclerosis, which made her infertile. But despite these complications, my parents knew that they wanted a child. So with the help of an adoption agency, they went and they found me. And that is a brief overview of who my family is and how we came together. Now, as you can imagine, grappling with this reality growing up wasn't always super easy. I have white, physically disabled parents, but I am neither of those things. So who am I? I am Celia Elise Tan Hui Furlow. But really, who am I? This is a question that has taunted me throughout the past 20 years of my life, and I've searched down the avenues of racial identity, personality tests, and attachment styles, trying to understand myself throughout the years. Now, with some perspective, I hope to discuss some questions that everyone can relate to. Who am I to the world around me? Who am I in my interpersonal relationships? And who am I to myself? When I wonder about who I am to the world around me, it is strange knowing that to others, perception is reality. Outwardly, I'm an Asian American woman, but internally, I'm a Vietnamese woman who knows little to nothing about my country's language, history, or culture. I grew up surrounded by white American culture in my family and my town, but I've also never fully related to my white peers. I remember being in kindergarten and learning the Pledge of Allegiance for the first time. Now, my school had a lot of Korean exchange students, and I remember my teacher saying that if we didn't want to say the pledge because we weren't from the United States, that we didn't have to. I remember wondering, does this statement apply to me? And sometimes I still wonder about this. In third grade, we heard about the Vietnam War for the first time. The conversation wasn't in depth, and I remember it being brought up in a social studies lesson, but I recall being nervous that Vietnamese people were once considered the enemy. I wondered if my peers would connect the dots back to me and think of me as the enemy too. And in the current times of COVID-19, sometimes I still wonder about this. Now, I'm going to give everyone a moment to think about your external appearance and how the world may perceive who you are. Do these perceptions reflect your internal concept of self? And do you experience societal expectations or stereotyping? Reflect for a moment. Despite outwardly being perceived as an Asian American, internally, I also struggle to relate to this culture. I've read books like Minor Feelings and Asian American Reckoning by Kathy Park Hong, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, and Crying in H Mart by Michelle Donner to try and better relate, but I don't. I am not the child of immigrants or first-generation Americans, and I don't have ties back to my country. Internally, I relate more to white Americans because that's how I was raised, but externally, people still perceive and expect me to be a certain way. In Minor Feelings, Hong describes how Asian Americans are often expected to be small and quiet and to take up little space and to be productive and diligent and to do as we're told. It is not history, language, nor culture that has caused me to connect with the Asian American community. Rather, I have found solace in the shared experiences of racial stereotypes and microaggressions. But because perception is reality, it's up to us as individuals to rewrite the scripts of how we are perceived. And that's something that I wanted to do today. As sociologist Puan Dinger describes, Asian Americans are often thought of as honorary whites or white adjacent, as we often achieve at the same level or surpass whites in the areas of educational attainment, occupational status, and income. And we are also the fastest growing racial minority population in the country. Now, it's important to note that these perceptions have allowed Asian Americans to attain a lot of privilege, and this privilege is often used to pit us against other racial minorities through the model minority myth. This myth promotes Asian Americans as a racial group that has achieved the American dream, and it drives a wedge between us and other racial groups by saying, if Asian Americans can be successful here, why can't you? I want to set the record straight by saying that the model minority myth is false. Dinger describes how Asian Americans can still experience racism while being used as a ploy to promote racism. Anti-Asian stereotypes like the outsider, the foreigner, and in general an inferior still persist. And in 2020, anti-Asian hate crimes rose by 73%, according to FBI data. To compare, general hate crime rates only increased by 13% in the same year. When we are not seen as useful, and rather seen as a threat, these are the results. People expect us to be small and quiet, and to take up little space, and to be productive and diligent, and to do as we're told. I am proud to be following in the footsteps of Hong and Wong and Zahner and Dinger, to name a few, by breaking that stereotype. And since perception is reality, I hope that this talk helps change your perception of who we are and who I am from the outside looking in. And you should know that you too have the power to change how the world perceives you. Dr. Yaba Blay, an academic, author, and Black female advocate whose work centers around identity and body politics, wrote, "Identity is nuanced. It's complicated, it's hard to define. Sometimes it's dangerous to define, depending on who's doing the defining." So let's think back to our initial question. Who are we to the world around us? Identity is nuanced. I'm a Vietnamese woman raised by white parents. I live in the gray area. Identity is complicated, it's hard to define. Parts of your identity are probably equally as complex as mine, whether you recognize it or not. But when you think about who has the power to define who your identity is to the world, wouldn't you like that person to be you? You have the power to change who you are to the world around you, and you have the power to change who you are within your interpersonal relationships. Returning back to my roots, my orphanage in Vietnam, for 5 months of my life, I lived in a room full of cribs full of other orphans, and there were a lot of us. I'm not exactly sure how many, but definitely too many for each of us to get the proper attention that we needed from our caretakers. My parents have described to me how the caretakers would come in every few hours to feed all of us, and I was a pretty hungry baby. Apparently, I learned that as soon as I let go of my bottle, the caretaker would leave me and move on to feed the next baby. So I essentially taught myself to not let go and to chug as much of the formula as I could so that I could get as much food as possible. And not to brag, but I was one of the biggest babies in that orphanage. But as it turns out, this way of life, this constant state of being nurtured briefly to then being left again, took a serious toll on me. Child developmental psychology says that humans naturally crave care and companionship as an evolutionary survival tactic. And as a result, from infancy, our early caregiving experiences shape how we perceive and relate to ourselves and others, and these trends will persist for the rest of our lives. This is the basis for the attachment theory, the origins of which are credited to psychologist John Bowlby. Now, according to this theory, there are 3 main attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant, and on rare occasions, there is a combination of anxious and avoidant attachment styles. Amir Levin and Rachel Heller, the co-authors of Attached, The New Science of Adult Attachment, explains that if your primary caregivers were consistently attentive and nurturing, you should develop a secure attachment style, which will present in adults as having low anxiety about the stability of your relationships and not avoiding intimacy. If your primary caregivers were inconsistently attentive, you should develop an anxious attachment style. Someone who develops this style deeply craves intimacy. They aren't avoidant of it, but they have high anxiety about the stability of their relationships. And Levine and Heller describe anxious attachment presenting in adults as needing constant reassurance from others and fearing abandonment and rejection. And finally, if your primary caregivers were distant and unresponsive, you should develop an avoidant attachment style. This means you may perceive intimacy as a hindrance to your independence, so you become highly avoidant of it, and you will also have low anxiety about the stability of your relationships because you don't really want close relationships. Now take a moment to consider what attachment style you may have. It can vary in degrees, but generally speaking, we all fall into one category. Think about who you are and how you act in your interpersonal relationships, and think about if that's who you want it to be. When I learned about attachment styles for the first time in my life, it felt like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. I found the attachment theory by researching how abandonment issues present in children who are adopted. And the first article I clicked on by the New Haven Residential Treatment Center said, "We now know that a child's attachment to her mother starts in the womb. So even a child adopted at birth can experience severe attachment disruption later on in life." Suddenly, everything made sense. According to an old therapist of mine and myself, I have an anxious attachment style. I have craved intimacy throughout my whole life, and I have always had trouble letting go of people who are close to me. As an adolescent, I often felt overbearing and overly concerned within my close relationships, but this felt out of my control. For the longest time, I haven't liked who I am in my relationships. Have you? If you're like me, you may be happy to hear that modern psychology has found that attachment styles are based on a variety of things, not just our upbringing. So, for example, genetics can make us more susceptible to develop a specific attachment style. And clinical psychologist and author Lisa Firestone explains that new attachment research has found the biggest predictor of our attachment style is how well we analyze and unpack our previous and current relational issues. Firestone says that making sense of our experiences leads us to no longer be ruled by them. So you and I, can change our attachment styles. With a lot of active self-analysis and internal work, we can change how we connect with others and who we are in our relationships. According to Levin and Heller, 1 in 4 people change their attachment styles over a 4-year period, and most do so without even knowing it. So it is possible for all of us to develop a sense of security. We can be better parents or children, siblings, friends, partners, students, teachers, or really whoever we want to be. And finally, I want to discuss how we define who we are to ourselves. As a teenager, I used to love personality tests like the Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, and even have been entertained by astrology, but that was mostly just for fun. And while I won't get into the technicalities of these personality assignment tests, I think that I like them for the same reason that most people do. These tests define our personalities for us. They do a lot of the hard work and analyzing that we may find too draining to do. But when we don't have these tests, when we have to reflect on ourselves by ourselves, how do we define ourselves? I think a lot of people try to define themselves through our jobs, how productive we are, or our hobbies, our interests, our social circles, or anything that we can connect to. As a kid, I thought that being left-handed and my favorite color being purple were personality traits. And I identified with these things because I wanted to identify with something. And I think that that's okay. It's okay to want to know who we are. I spent my whole life wanting answers, and from what I've gathered, it's also okay to not know, to spend time figuring it out, and to change along the way. Historian and former UNC professor George Tyndall wrote, "To change is not necessarily to lose one's identity. To change sometimes is to find it." Now, rather than defining myself by my dominant hand and my favorite color, I tell people that I want to be a public school teacher someday. So who are you to yourself? Which straws of your personality do you grasp for when trying to define yourself? I hope that by listening to this talk, you've become more open to analyzing different parts of your identity and feel more comfortable and confident knowing that whoever you want to be is up to you. Again, my name is Celia Elise Tan Hui Furlow. Thank you.